Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start, as always, by taking a look at the day's headlines. The pre-summit prep ramps up. America's top diplomat says senior US officials are heading to Asia this weekend to lay the groundwork for the second Kim-Trump summit. The summit is set for Hanoi at the end of the month. South Korea introduces tough new countermeasures on older vehicles. This as the country hopes to get a handle on the fine dust that continues to plague the nation. Plus, US President Donald Trump is due to sign an immigration bill, but will declare a national emergency to get his border wall with Mexico. Our top story this morning. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington hopes to achieve as much as possible from the upcoming summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump to continue the pre-summit preparations. A team of American officials, they will be traveling to Asia this weekend. Our Kang starts us off.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington aims to get as far down the road as it can with Pyongyang at the second summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump in Vietnam at the end of February. Speaking at a security conference in Poland on Thursday local time, Pompeo added that it's not just about the denuclearization pillar the two leaders agreed at the Singapore summit in last June. He said the two sides will certainly discuss how to reduce tensions and military risks so that peace and security can be brought to the Korean peninsula. But during an interview with CBS News on Wednesday, the U.S. Secretary of State pointed out that it's time for Kim Jong-un to deliver on his promise of complete denuclearization. Pompeo added that a team of U.S. officials will travel to Asia this weekend to continue preparations for the upcoming summit. Although he did not mention where the team will visit or what it hopes to achieve, Pompeo expressed optimism that the team's visit will have a good outcome. Kim and Trump are scheduled to meet for the second time from February 27th to 28th in Hanoi to discuss North Korea's denuclearization in exchange for corresponding measures from the U.S. Negotiators from both sides, including U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun and his counterpart Kim Hyok-chol, met in Pyongyang last week to discuss the summit agenda and logistical details. They're expected to resume their talks next week. Kang, Arirang News.
Now, the top diplomats of South Korea and the United States met on the sidelines of an international conference in Poland on Thursday to discuss preparations for the Hanoi summit. According to Seoul's Foreign Ministry, Foreign Minister Kang and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo discussed ways to ensure a successful summit and agreed to continue close coordination at all levels of government. They also exchanged views on last week's pre-summit talks in Pyongyang, which involved officials from North Korea and the U.S., and reaffirmed their commitment to achieving denuclearization and peace on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's National Assembly Speaker says that efforts to advance inter-Korean relations are driven by the goal of achieving North Korea's denuclearization, as well as for the regime to improve its ties with the United States. Speaker Moon Hee-sang made the remarks during a speech at the Korea Society, a non-profit organization dedicated to Seoul-Washington relations. He said Seoul continues to emphasize that without the North's abandonment of nuclear weapons, there will be limitations on the improvement of inter-Korean ties, adding that it should give up its nuclear arsenal. Seoul has a strong determination to provide support and to cooperate with Pyongyang if it does so. His comments come amid concerns inter-Korean relations are advancing at a much faster pace than North Korea-US ties. Speaker Moon stressed that the peace process on the Korean peninsula is a global peace process, saying it's a destination that South Korea, the US, and the international community should be striving towards. Now, back in December of last year, Seoul and Pyongyang dismantled 10 frontline guard posts each in the DMZ to build trust and establish peace in the area. Now, each side decided to preserve one guard posts, or GP as they're called, out of the initially designated 11 spots, partially to let them serve as a reminder of history in that area. Our Park Ji-won has more on how the atmosphere at the DMZ has changed since.
This place is only about 300 meters away from the military demarcation line, the border dividing South and North Korea. And this now defunct facility used to be one of many frontline guard posts set up along the border. This guard post, located in Gosang, Gangwon-do province at the northeast of the demilitarized zone, started operations back in July 1953, right after the armistice agreement between the two Koreas came into effect. And until only last October, dozens of South Korean soldiers were stationed here. But as this was designated as one of the 11 guard posts that South and North Korea have each decided to remove as part of implementing last September's comprehensive inter-Korean military agreement, it is now all empty, devoid of firearms and troops, and with other facilities like electricity and water supplies also removed. The South Korean national flag and UN command flag that used to hang here are also gone. However, as the two Koreas decided to preserve one of the 11 guard posts each for historical reasons, this place has been preserved. North Korea has decided to preserve a guard post farther west, and the North Korean guard post that was located less than 600 meters away from here was demolished last fall. According to military sources, North Korean soldiers can sometimes be seen patrolling in the area. South Korean troops stationing at nearby posts say, despite reduced inter-Korean tensions at the border, they stay vigilant.
All our troops conduct operations with firm and full defensive readiness in order not to create any vacuum in our military defense posture.
It's believed that the South has about 60 and the North about 160 guard posts inside the demilitarized zone. Seoul's Defense Ministry officials say the ultimate goal of both Koreas is to remove all of them in the near future. The Cultural Heritage Administration also announced Thursday that this guard post will be designated as a national cultural asset to show its symbolic meaning. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, the two Koreas will announce which sports they will compete in as a joint team at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. They are going to do so this afternoon. South Korea's sports minister, Do Jong-hwan, and his North Korean counterpart, Kim Il-guk, will meet with the chief of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, to discuss forming unified teams for next year's Olympics. In their previous bilateral meetings, the top sports officials of South and North Korea had agreed to try and form joint teams for rowing, judo, women's basketball and women's hockey. The Korean officials are also expected to submit their bid to jointly host the 2032 Summer Olympics when they meet with Bach on this Friday. Now, to a shocking UN report that shows a group of Al-Qaida members operating in Syria have been trying to get into South Korea. The report says the Uzbek nationals chose South Korea due to the large number of Uzbek migrants in the country. There are tens of thousands of Uzbeks here. Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to a report released this month by the UN Security Council on the Islamic State group and Al-Qaida, a group of Al-Qaida-linked Uzbeks operating in Syria have been attempting to infiltrate South Korea. It added the Al-Qaida members requested to enter South Korea via Turkey. The report also states that the militants chose South Korea due to the relatively large Uzbek community in the nation, with 20 to 30,000 Uzbek workers calling South Korea home. Following the report, Seoul's Ministry of Justice ordered diplomatic missions abroad to thoroughly examine cases of Uzbeks applying for Korean visas in third countries. The ministry told diplomatic offices to not issue visas to Uzbek nationals confirmed to have visited prohibited areas, including Syria. Uzbek nationals are not subject to a visa exemption, so they're required to apply for a visa at a South Korean embassy in Uzbekistan However, if they have permanent residence or long-term residency in another country, they can apply for a visa in a third country. The Ministry of Justice say it will block the entry of Interpol and terror suspects through the pre-checker system, adding it will thoroughly evaluate the UN report to prevent any terrorism in the nation. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Let's start our international news with the huge news that has broken within the past couple of hours regarding immigration and President Trump's envisioned border wall. The White House says that President Trump is going to sign a border security and federal spending bill to avoid another government shutdown. He isn't entirely happy with what's in that bill, but the White House added that President Trump will also declare a national emergency to try and obtain enough funds to build his promised US-Mexico border wall, which played such a big part in his campaign pledges. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Noah Aram. So Aram, what's the latest?
Well, Mark, the bipartisan legislation was passed by the Senate on Thursday before going to the Democratic-led House of Representatives for final congressional approval. It includes $1.4 billion in funding for border security, denying Trump the near $6 billion he had demanded for his signature border wall. To get the necessary funding, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said in a statement that the president would be declaring a national emergency to stop what she called a humanitarian crisis at the border. That means Trump would be bypassing Congress by using military funds. Trump had warned of such a move before, but some Republicans argued it would only set a dangerous precedent. However, GOP leader Mitch McConnell indicated his support for the move, reversing his earlier stance. Unsurprisingly, Democrats reacted angrily to the announcement. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer issued a joint statement accusing Trump of committing what they called gross abuse of power and lawless act. Pelosi has also suggested taking legal action should the president make an emergency declaration.
Did I ever say I was filing a legal challenge? You said Democrats. I may. That's an option, and we'll review our options. But it's important to note that when the president declares this emergency, first of all, it's not an emergency, what's happening at the border. It's a humanitarian challenge to us. The president has tried to sell a bill of goods to American people. But putting that aside, just in terms of the president making an end run around Congress. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Turning to Brexit news now, British Prime Minister Theresa May has suffered yet another defeat on her Brexit strategy in Parliament. MPs voted 303 to 258 against the government's Brexit motion, which included an amendment on renegotiating the Irish backstop, a contentious part of the deal. It also included a non-binding amendment to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Hardline Brexit supporters in May's Conservative Party decided to abstain, saying that backing the motion would have meant they would be endorsing efforts to rule out a no-deal scenario. Though the vote is not legally binding, it does send a strong signal to both the Prime Minister and Brussels that the British Parliament is not happy with how they are negotiating divorce terms. The opposition Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn criticised May for not attending Thursday's debate, adding she needed to admit her Brexit strategy had failed. Downing Street said the result would not change May's approach to talks with the EU. That would be tough because EU leaders have repeatedly ruled out any renegotiation on their agreed terms. At least 40 Indian paramilitary police officers have been killed in Kashmir after a car carrying explosives rammed into their bus. Pakistan-based Islamist group Jaish-e-Mohammed said it was behind Thursday's attack. It was the deadliest attack on security personnel since the start of the insurgency against Indian rule in the disputed region 30 years ago. The bus was part of a security convoy which was travelling down a major highway toward the city of Srinagar. Pakistan, meanwhile, rejected suggestions that it was responsible for the attack. Both India and Pakistan claim all of Muslim-majority Kashmir, but only control parts of it.
Thank you as always to Arirang for the world news there. Now, South Korea has posted a current account surplus for the 21st year in a row. The Bank of Korea says the current account recorded a surplus of $76.4 billion in 2018. That's up by $1 billion from the previous year. The goods account posted a surplus of $112 billion last year, while the services account deficit was $30 billion. That deficit has been reduced from 2017's $37 billion thanks to improvements in the travel account. But in December, the current account surplus was $4.8 billion for the month. That's down from $5.2 billion in November due to a drop in semiconductor and petrochemical goods exports, making it the lowest figure in 8 months. Now, the Environment Ministry will enforce special measures to reduce air pollution in South Korea starting today. So, from this Friday, old diesel cars will be banned from operating nationwide when fine dust levels exceed 50 micrograms for 2 days in a row. And from June 1st, the regulated vehicles will expand to include old petrol cars as well. Also, while the alternate no driving day was only previously implemented for those in the public sector, the new emergency measures will cover each and every vehicle owner in the country, not just civil servants. In addition, schools will either slash class times or close altogether when fine dust levels are deemed too high. So, as we just heard there, from today, we're going to see these special measures come into effect to hopefully reduce fine dust emissions so we can breathe a little easier and give our throats a rest as well. One of them is reducing the number of old diesel cars on the streets, as we just heard. Owners of such vehicles have been in a terrible rush to make sure they're ready for the new rule changes, and if they haven't ready by now, then they better hurry up. Hong Yu with the details.
The special fine dust reduction measures in effect from Friday ban old diesel cars from the roads on days when the average density of ultra-fine dust is above 50 micrograms per cubic meter for 2 consecutive days. Those caught driving a diesel car registered before December 2005 will be fined around $100. There are detection devices on certain major roads, and this time the ban will be enforced in all 17 cities and provinces. This is a junkyard in Gyeonggi-do province, and it's full of cars ready for scrapping. Most of them have been registered for early scrapping as the government plans to expand its range of regulated vehicles to include old diesel and petrol cars starting from June 1st in its effort to curb pollution.
About 15 old diesel cars get scrapped every day here. That's about 15% more than before the government started this plan to reduce fine dust.
But getting rid of an old car to get a new one is not only a pain, it costs money. To help people, the government is offering financial support in the form of a subsidy for a new car or a device that can be attached to reduce emissions. If buying a new car is a problem, then the second option might be good since the government pays for 90% of the device. The Environment Ministry says these measures can reduce fine dust by 19,000 tons a year, but there are some doubts.
The problem is the exhaust reducing device only works for 3 years. To keep it working longer requires a checkup from time to time. The government needs to help in this regard in terms of money and technology.
This year, the Environment Ministry expects the fine dust emergency measures will be issued about 9 times, so it's important that drivers stay up to date. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in held a meeting on Thursday with representatives of small businesses and the self-employed. This is all part of his administration's efforts to help boost the sluggish economy from the ground up rather than the other way around. Shin Se-min reports.
Promising more support for SMEs and the self-employed. President Moon Jae-in held yet another frank discussion session Thursday with representatives of business, the 4th of its kind since the turn of the new year. The president noted that as of the end of last year, self-employed people and SMEs numbered some 5.6 million, so he suggested they be treated as their own sector.
그러니 자영업은 우리 경제의 매우 중요한 한 축입니다. 자영업과 소상공인의 규모가 이 정도라면 독자적인 경제 정책의 영역으로 삼는 것이 마땅하다는 생각입니다.
Having listened to some of the difficulties faced by self-employed business owners, the president ordered his government to come up with ways to help lower the burden of credit card fees for them. The president also promised by 2021 to issue $16 billion worth of gift cards to be used at small businesses and traditional markets, while equipping the markets with better parking facilities, a factor that could directly boost sales. The president then revisited the idea of perhaps slowing down the government's minimum wage hikes, like this year's of nearly 11%.
최저임금의 인상을 결정하는 과정에서 자영업자와 소상공인들의 의견도 충분히 대변되도록 하겠습니다.
President Moon, while consistently pushing for one of his major economic policies, the income-led growth, brought up the possibility of less aggressive minimum wage hikes in light of the backlash from business circles and the weak job market. With the president's hopes for better economic circumstances for those doing business this year and his repeated hints that the minimum wage hike might have to slow down, such a move looks more likely in the coming years. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, local financial authorities and global banks like Morgan Stanley have pointed to growing household debt in South Korea as one of the biggest risks to the local economy going forward. Our Kim Hye-sung explains why it's such a huge problem and the measures being rolled out to hopefully drive down this debt.
Korea's household debt has doubled since 2008, topping $1.34 trillion as of the third quarter of last year. That's about the size of the country's GDP. The Bank of Korea says between 2008 and 2016, household debt minus income growth grew at 3.1% a year, 8 times faster than the average of OECD countries. According to the Bank for International Settlements, Korea's household debt increased the second fastest in the world in the second quarter of 2018, trailing just behind China. This ballooning debt is attributed to slower economic growth, low interest rates that encourage borrowing, and Korea's deregulation of the housing market, which took effect in 2014, triggering a nationwide buying spree.
If people can borrow money, use it for their businesses, make a profit and pay it back, that's not in itself a problem. But debt has outstripped the growth in household income of around 4 to 5%, and debt borrowed by lower-income people can cause instability in the financial system when they're unable to pay it back.
Figures differ, but one by the central bank shows lower-income people, those in the bottom 30%, borrowed more than $76 billion, and more than 1.5 million people took out loans from 3 or more financial institutions.
The 2008 global financial crisis was sparked in the U.S. by a sharp increase in high-risk mortgages that went into default. Korea's household debt is not as bad as that, but if triggered by some economic shock and people can't pay what they owe, this debt could potentially drive down consumption and cause banks to rapidly become insolvent.
The government's housing regulations, including a tax rise that went into effect last September and the BOK's rate hike, has helped slow down borrowing. But slowdown in domestic and global economic growth will make it difficult to reduce the debt. Experts say it's more important than ever to rein in the debt increase, improve banks' fiscal soundness, and come up with supportive measures like longer maturities to help low-income people especially pay back their loans. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
Good morning. Those of us in the capital area had a tough morning commute as unexpected morning snow hit in the early hours with reports of traffic accidents. But we did get more accumulation than expected though. But most of snow has let up for now but should return again in the mid-afternoon. And we are expecting traffic chaos again, so it could be unpleasant, snowy Friday evening commute. Central regions, including Seoul and surrounding areas, will see 1 to 3 centimeters of snowfall, while mountainous regions in Gangwon province and easternmost islands of Dokdo and Ulleungdo could see up to 5 centimeters. Temperature-wise, expect to see colder temperatures through the weekend. Lows on Sunday could drop to as low as -6 degrees Celsius here in the capital, but dry and sunny weekend are on tap. And as for this afternoon, daily highs will range from 2 to 12 degrees Celsius. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all the news we have for now. Do stay tuned to us on Arirang TV. We'll have our next newscast at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. Have a wonderful weekend. Until next time, goodbye.